Hey guys and girls, welcome back to the Texas Reloading Room. My name is Justin, and today I've got a very exciting video for you for two different reasons. First reason is I'm actually working with a new audio and video setup. This camera has a much larger range of display, and we're just going to try it and see how that goes. I'm also recording the audio externally through a studio microphone into my recording software directly, so hopefully the audio clarity of my voice will be better, and the video is going to give you a broader range of display. So what we're going to do today actually is take my 1911 here, and you guys have seen this in a couple previous videos. I did the most recently, how fast can I field strip this, and I think that was what, like 18 seconds. And then we also did a video on the basic field strip breakdown and cleaning process of this. But today, inspired by some comments from some of my classmates, I want to break this firearm down into its individual pieces like we've been doing with so many others, and explain to you how everything fits together and the parts that interact. And one of the reasons I want to do that with this is because this is a very timeless type of firearm. This firearm's been around for over 100 years. Not this particular one, but the design's been around for over 100 years, and it is one of the most well-known and respected firearms in the community. So let's go ahead and get the camera repositioned down at the bench and start getting this thing apart. Alright, fair warning first of all, this video could become long very quickly. Hopefully the camera angle is adequate. I've tried to add some extra lighting. It's still not perfect. I'm going to have to do some work on it, but as you can see down here on my mat, I have my 1911. I've also got a 90-degree hook pick, and I've got my hollow ground screwdriver bit set. I highly recommend using hollow ground bits and nothing else, simply because you don't want to mess up screws. Just like these grip screws right here can cost you, $2, $3 a piece if they're messed up. So be very careful what you're doing. These are really the only two tools that I absolutely require for taking this apart. You may need some others. I'm not going to get into everything that you need in this exact video. We'll just kind of handle that as things go. But first thing I'm going to do, remove my magazine and clear the firearm. Alright, this firearm is now clear. I will set my magazine off to the side so there is no magazine in it. The chamber is clear and we're good to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and press this down and rotate this to the 90-degree point clockwise. Remove my spring stop, my spring cup, and my spring. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do, go ahead and cock your hammer back. I'm going to get this back just like that and push my slide stop out. Okay, now we can take the slide completely off, set the frame aside for the moment, and we're going to focus on this. Okay, so the next thing we do, push that back. You can take your spring guide out. I'm trying to think of exactly what they would call this otherwise. Let's see what they say on here. It's recoil spring guide. So take the recoil spring guide out. Next thing you want to do, rotate this counterclockwise to the 45-degree position, and you can pull that barrel bushing out. Fold your link down forward and pull your barrel out. If you want to take the link down, you can, but unless you're replacing the link for some reason, don't worry about that, because this pin is usually pinned in place. Okay, now for the next step in the disassembly of the slide, we want to take our hook pick here, push the firing pin down, and just carefully pull that plate forward just a little bit, the firing pin stop plate. Hold your finger over the top of it and slide that plate the rest of the way out. And the firing pin will come out and contact your finger. That's why you want it there. You can set your plate to the side, pull your firing pin and your spring out. And in many instances you will notice that the spring is slightly tapered. One end will actually have a concave way, so you always want to make sure that you put that back together the same way. Next thing we can do is remove the extractor. So we just take our hook pick again, insert it into that groove, and we can pull it right out. Okay, now that is essentially the entire assembly of the slide taken down. We're not going to take the sights off. These particular sights are silver soldered in place on mine, which is very similar to a standard GI issue. So it's really not all that complex to take the slide assembly apart. I will go ahead and give you a fair warning. Some of the components of the frame can seem a little bit more daunting, but that's okay. What we want to do first is take the grips off. So select an appropriately sized bit, as large as you can, that will fill the groove as best as it can. So this will be the one that we go for. And on occasion, especially if the factory Loctited these, you might end up actually taking the barrel or the bushing for the grip screw out as well. Generally what you can do in that case is I'll hold it like this. I'll give it a little bit of a tightening turn and then jar it real quick counterclockwise, and that should separate the Loctite from it. Trust me, I've done this many times on grip screws that I have actually Loctited in place myself, as I used to be a range technician. Take your grips off and set those to the side. Now, one of the things that you may already notice about my frame is that it's not quite as skeletonized as some others are. This is a Foster frame, so it's sort of a budget frame almost, you could say, but it's still very good quality. And each frame has its own subtle differences. Like a lot of them, you'll see this hole will also be here, so mine's just not as big. It really doesn't affect things at all, but you know, it is what it is. The next thing I like to do to prepare for the rest of the takedown on this is well, let's see, before we let the hammer down, we'll go ahead and take off the thumb safety here. Now be careful when you take the thumb safety out, because this detent and spring could come flying off, and that is the most common part that is lost when people are doing this disassembly process. So I'm just going to cup it nice and easy, and you'll put it up like this, and then you'll start wiggling it out. Just like that, and it will come out just like that. Here's the rear detent, and the spring is still in there. What you can do if you want to take all that out, just take your hook pick and run it up through the front, and we can take the other two pieces out. Okay, so these three pieces are essential for making sure that the thumb safety can operate properly without flopping back down into the ready position without warning. Okay, now we can depress the grip safety. Gently let the hammer down. You don't want it to strike this bare face very hard. Okay, the next thing we want to do, since we have relieved the tension on the hammer strut and spring, is go ahead and take the pin out for our assembly here in the back. Okay, and that will just slide free just like that. Now inside of this, as you may have noted in your reading material, we are going to have some parts that are mentioned over here That's going to be the locking bolt, the mainspring retainer, the mainspring itself, and the mainspring cap. So this is the mainspring assembly. The mainspring is inside here. It is a very high pressure spring for what it is. I recommend, unless you absolutely have to, do not take this apart. The mainspring cap is right here. That is the surface that the hammer strut contacts. And here is the retaining pin right here. Okay, and I am not going to disassemble this because I do not want to have to put it back together. Realistically, these should never really have problems, so we'll set that aside for now. We'll set the takedown pin and the thumb safety to the side. Now we can slide out our grip safety and set that to the side. And the next thing that we want to focus on, what you can go ahead and do, is you can take your sear spring out just like that. Now this is an old style Series 70 sear spring. A Series 80 sear spring will have this center, what do they call these? I can't remember, but this center leaf will be split in two pieces, and the right side will engage an additional safety item that prevents this gun from firing when it is jarred or dropped, etc., etc. So we'll set that to the side. Now what I want to do is remove my hammer pin, and the two pins for these are going, the hammer assembly pin and the sear pin, those two are going to be one-way pins. They will feed on mine, they will feed out to the left. Okay. Now you can take the hammer strut off if you want to. I'm going to leave that on there. This is one of those pins that's good and set in place. You don't really need to do anything like that unless you break your hammer strut or your hammer. And then we will take out the sear assembly. And if you're not terribly familiar with this design, go ahead and look inside of the back of the sear assembly so you know how it looks. That way you can put it back together the right way when you reassemble it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and push my sear pin out and then carefully slide it out here. Okay, all right. So that's really what you'll mostly ever do. You can disassemble the magazine catch if you want. You will need to remove the magazine catch to take out the trigger, so I'll go ahead and do that for you. You will need your screwdriver set again, and the magazine catch will take a smaller bit. So once again, find the bit that you want by fitting things just right. So we're going to take the smallest bit in my set, push in, rotate 90 to 180 degrees clockwise. You'll feel it when it stops, and you can go ahead and pull your catch out. And if you want to, well, if you look right here, you can kind of see how that operates. And if you want to further disassemble this, you can just put your screw in there, or put that in there, and you can disassemble the spring, the retainer, and the actual magazine release. I'm going to put that back together for now and set that aside. And then finally you can slide your trigger out, and this is basically it. Now, do not assume when you start to build your own 1911 that your parts are just going to fall together. I can 99.99% guarantee you that will not happen, and the only reason I say I don't say 100% is simply because you never know. Somebody might get super lucky and all their parts will just fall into place without any fitment. On this one, I have not been so lucky. I've had to, and the only thing that I've really replaced on it, I put this aftermarket slide stop on there. Now that was just basically a put in and go. But I also changed this. The original was not a beaver tail. I like the beaver tail because I kept getting that hammer touching me right here, and that'll mess you up. So you can either put a beaver tail on it or you can bob the hammer. And I preferred to put the beaver tail on. Now I had to not only fit and grind inside the groove here, but I also had to fit the hammer strut because those were contacting and giving me resistance to the point where the firearm was not operational. And it can be a tedious process sometimes, but you have to understand it's just going to take patience to get things the way you want, and you would rather take the time and get it done right than to get it done in a hurry. So now that we've got this all apart, we can talk, a little bit about how the things go together and how they interact with each other. But if you guys have any questions about this, I encourage you, number one, to do your own research, and number two, feel free to ask me down in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that I can. And but let's go ahead and I'm not going to take the grip screw bushings out because, well, let's be honest, they're in there. I want them to stay in there, and if I start jostling around with them, they'll come out. But let's go ahead and start putting things back together, and you can at least kind of get a feel for how things are going to go. I'm not going to go into any great amount of detail how all these things interact with each other, but hopefully you guys will be able to kind of infer that on your own. So we're going to go ahead and put the trigger assembly back in first. And essentially how that's going to go in, you can see the back end of this trigger assembly has a slightly slanted angle there. You want it slanted just like that to the outside bottom, and then we can push that in, get that seated. Next we will go ahead and drop our magazine catch and release button in, and get that unset. Test functionality on it. It appears to be working just fine. So the next thing we need to put in is the sear itself, and let's see, what are they calling that here? 1L and 1K. So that's going to be the disconnector and the sear, which is going to be these two pieces right here. Those are the two pieces that I told you to look at carefully so you remember how they came out. We are going to hold this just like this so you can see how that's got that angle. We're going to angle that out here and put the sear on it just like that. And on this particular step, you need to have a little bit of patience because there are instances where I've tried to put this back in multiple times and it just wants to kind of fall out and do its own thing. But just a little bit of patience. Sometimes that's all we need. Hook picks come in handy for these sort of things too. So the main thing you want to do is get that disconnector into that hole on the top of your slide, or on top of your frame, just like that. Now make sure that your sear is sitting where it needs to be. And I think what happened is it fell underneath my trigger. There we go. It needs to be on top of the back of the trigger bar. Okay. So be mindful in case it falls like this one did. And the next thing we need to do is slip our pin back in. And this can be a tricky part as well. Sometimes it helps greatly if you can manage to use your hook pick to line things up a bit on the other side, just like that. Okay. Now you can put your hammer back in. And the hammer's a little bit easier. You can hold it with one hand and slide it in just like that. Okay. Now, before we go too much further on this, take my sear spring and make sure that it's contacting everything right. Because sometimes that left leaf on it will want to slip underneath there where it shouldn't be. But it looks to me like we're getting pretty good engagement on it, and yeah, so, and this is good because actually to get the thumb safety back in, we need the hammer in the cocked position. That's what makes it the easiest. So what we can do is go ahead and get our grip safety and make sure that your sear spring doesn't roll, guys. It really has a tendency to do that. So we'll get the grip safety and we'll go ahead and put that in. And make sure that your hammer strut is there in the center. And the next thing we want to do is take our thumb safety. Well, actually, you know, I almost misled you there. Take your 3 pieces here, your 2 detents and your spring, insert the smaller 2-stage detent into this hole first, and the larger detent will be on the back side. Now we can put our thumb safety in. And once again, the hook pick is great for pressing this detent into place, and there we go. Okay. Next step, and this one can be quite tricky. So what I recommend doing is actually bringing your hammer back forward, and we're going to put the mainspring housing back in place. Now, the mainspring housing is going to need to accomplish 2 things at this point. It's going to push down on the sear spring to hold that in place, and usually the way I fit this, since we need to have the hammer strut up just a little bit to engage the mainspring cap, I turn it over like this, and that'll help me get the mainspring in line with the hammer strut, just like that. And then you'll know pretty quickly if it's lined up correctly because you'll be able to push it in with no problem, just like that. Okay. So we'll hold it there just like that. Put our retainer pin back in. And I usually just give that a couple taps with my screwdriver handle, and that's good to go. Now our frame is back together. We want to test the function. Okay, so our grip safety is working, and the thumb safety works as well. Okay, so put that back into cocked, and we can go about reassembling our slide. So first thing we want to do is put the extractor back into place, and you'll note on the rear of the extractor this groove needs to line up with the groove here on the back of the slide. So slide that in there just like that. Alright guys, and if you can see that, you'll notice that they are lined up perfectly right here on this side. So next thing we do, put our firing pin and firing pin spring back in. Remember what I said about that one-way entrance on the spring, and then line that up just right. You can start your stop here, your stop plate, and then push your firing pin down. And if you're having trouble getting your stop plate into the groove, more than likely it's because your extractor groove is not lined up correctly, so double check those. And once you see that rear of that firing pin pop out, your plate is seated nice and good. Next thing we're going to do is take our barrel, fold the link forward, and put those together just like this. And you can wiggle it a little bit until you get it just right where it needs to be, and you'll be able to feel when it locks into place. Now take your barrel bushing, and this extrusion here will fit in the notch in between your barrel and your recoil spring and guide rod. Do that and then fold it down at 90 degrees, pull your link back, insert your guide rod. Now on some firearms this will be a full-length guide rod. Springfield is notable for that, but we're going to go ahead and put this in just like that. And then your recoil spring is going to have a closed end and an open end like this. The open end always needs to go inside your spring cup, and the closed end will go towards the guide rod's base, just like that. Now I'm going to leave this just like this and start putting this firearm together. Hold that, because you're going to want your link in this position so that you can feed your slide stop through, okay? And what I'll do is go ahead and assemble that just until I see those holes line up. And it's not perfect, guys, but you should be able to see through it just like that. And I will go ahead and it should drop easily into place just like that. Next thing I'm going to do is rack the slide back and seat that all the way. You can pull that back forward now. Put your spring cup on the end of your spring here. Push it down into place. And then rotate your barrel bushing back down. And at this point you can check your functionality again. Everything appears to be working just fine. If you're fitting a new barrel, especially, one of the things you want to make sure is that your barrel is functioning like it should. Of course, you'll know right away if you haven't taken enough material off of it, because it will never reach lockup. But that's going to be the basics on how the 1911 is constructed. So we'll go ahead and put our grips back on here. And always start your screws by hand, especially the ones with fine threads. It's very easy to mess these up if you're not careful. If you needed additional tools to take apart your particular 1911, please let me know, and also let me know who made that firearm and exactly what it was that you needed an extra tool for. As I said earlier, this firearm is set up strictly as an older style GI issue 1911. There are no fancy bells and whistles on it other than the couple that I myself have added after I purchased it. One thing to note too is this firearm was also hand built from different various pieces and fitted by a local pistol smith that I know and trust. Alright, so hopefully you learned something new about the 1911 today that you didn't know before. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback on the video that you just watched. I take apart this firearm at least once a week. I don't know what it is about it. Some part of disassembling these things feels cathartic to me, and I just love to do it. Hopefully you guys will share the same passion about your firearms. As I said, leave a comment down in the box below. Tell me how you felt about the video. Tell me how you feel about your firearm. And I'll do my best to answer all the comments that I get. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, thanks for watching.